This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ugandan victims react after the ICC sentences rebel commander Dominic Ongwen to 25 years in prison. The debate intensifies over COVID-19 vaccine patent waivers. Are poorer nations ready for the manufacturing challenge? And Zimbabwe is proceeding with the sale of elephant hunting rights despite red listing by world conservation bodies. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. With me in studio is Raman Young with a preview of your business news.
That's right, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Nigeria extends an incentive program designed to boost dollar remittances into Africa's largest economy. And we'll explore why ESCOM management isn't quite sold on a possible deal to buy electricity from a Turkish firm. We'll have details on those stories and plenty more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, in our top story this hour, the International Criminal Court has sentenced former Ugandan warlord Dominic Ongwen to 25 years in jail for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Ongwen is the first member of the Lord's Resistance Army rebel group to appear before the court. Leon Senyange reports.
And for this, Mr. Ongwen,
in a trial that has lasted close to 5 years, the International Criminal Court pronounced the sentence of Dominic Ongwen. The former child soldier and commander in the Lord's Resistance Army was accused of 61 crimes that included torture, rape, child abductions and murder.
The majority of the chamber is of the view that a total term of 25 years of imprisonment is proportionate to the gravity of the crimes Dominic Ongwen committed and congruous with his specific individual circumstances.
Ongwen was part of the rebel group that fought against the government of Uganda in the northern part of the country. The insurgency lasted more than 2 decades. The presiding judge in his final statements indicated that the decision of Ongwen's jail term had been a particularly difficult one. He said the chamber felt the highest responsibility to determine an appropriate sentence given that Ongwen had been abducted as a child. Ongwen was convicted for his role as an adult in LRA atrocities from 2002 to 2005. More than 4,000 victims offered testimonies during his trial. They recalled the rebel activities, the impact of which many have continued to live with.
We were abducted by LRA from our school, St. Mary's College, Aboke, and we were between the ages of 12 and 15. My classmates died in the hands of the LRA. My classmates were abused by the LRA rebels. They were forced to become mothers as teenagers. It's just so unacceptable.
The crimes committed by the rebel group left more than 100,000 people dead and 1,000 others displaced. Even with the sentencing of Ongwen, many feel a long way from full closure to the injustices committed during the insurgents.
The trial of the LRA commanders is symbolic, but doesn't really, in my view, address the deeper justice needs for the wider community in northern Uganda, many of whom their Tiak killings, for example, are not part of the Buchoro massacre, the Balonyo massacre is not part of the trial before the court, but these were episodes of massacres for which victims are still waiting for justice.
According to the defense,
Ongwen was one of 5 LRA commanders the ICC issued arrest warrants for. The LRA rebel leader Joseph Kony remains in hiding in the Central African Republic. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, let's turn to the latest from India now. The country's coronavirus case tally has surged past 21 million. It's registered more than 400,000 new cases. The second time this month that over 400,000 cases have been registered in a single day. The daily death toll is at 3,980, the highest so far. More than 230,000 people in India have already died from the disease. The government has resisted calls for a full national lockdown due to the economic impact. The state of Kerala, though, has announced a one-week lockdown from Saturday, while nighttime curfews and partial lockdowns are already in place in some states. The World Trade Organization has been in a two-day meeting to discuss whether intellectual property rights for COVID-19 vaccines should be temporarily waived. A proposal to lift vaccine patent protection was put forward by South Africa and India in October last year. Then on Wednesday, the Biden administration announced that it supports the waiver. But what would this mean for Africa? Angela Coppola finds out.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, speaking at a roundtable organised by the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response, stressed the importance of the waiver.
As we prepare for future pandemics, we need to accelerate efforts to realize universal health coverage. We need to ensure that vaccines and other life-saving treatments are seen and considered as public goods. Such a waiver will enable more countries to produce COVID-19 vaccines. It will enable us to have diagnostics and treatments to make them more accessible and affordable to poor countries.
The proposal had originally been met with opposition from the United States and Europe. That all changed on Wednesday when the US administration announced their support for the waiver.
But that being said, I think we also need to be pragmatic in terms of what the results of this sort of an outcome would be. Unless there's a clear commitment on the part of the IP holders to actually assist with the technology transfer of the products, the chances of this making a meaningful difference in the immediate future is fairly nominal.
But questions have been raised about the ability of many African countries to produce these vaccines in the short term.
I think the reality for most of Africa is that there's extreme limited ability to produce vaccines from scratch, let alone to be able to go through the full sort of discovery phase in terms of what's required to produce these messenger RNA vaccines, which seems to be the one that is most attractive.
It's going to take anything between 12 to 18 months before there's any meaningful vaccine production capacity on the continent.
But at the same time, it does lend itself to opportunities for other middle-income country manufacturers, especially the many manufacturers in India as well as in China, in Brazil, Indonesia as an example, where they probably do have the facilities in place.
The US change of heart is good news. It's likely to spur the WTO to move relatively quickly.
And I think especially for the US companies where the US government has invested heavily to get those vaccines through to licensure, the US government is in a position to actually put pressure on those companies to accede.
It appears that the first hurdle has been cleared and everybody's in agreement that waiving those IP rights for the production of COVID vaccines is a good idea. Now we get down to the nitty-gritty and the details. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, Europe now says it's ready to discuss a proposal at the WTO to temporarily suspend intellectual property rights on COVID-19 vaccines. This, of course, after the US said it would back the idea. Now, this marks what could be a major shift in the bloc's stance on the issue and the global race to vaccinate. But as CGTN's Tony Waterman explains, the U-turn in Washington not only left Brussels on the back foot, but also scrambling to defend its position against the waivers.
Europe has long contended that suspending intellectual property rights, essentially giving away the internal secrets of how vaccines are made, could stifle innovation and wouldn't necessarily fix supply problems or speed up global vaccination like supporters of the proposal claim. Brussels feels that the only way to solve these issues is by expanding capacity, which it is trying to do internally. But with the U.S. now backing these patent waivers, Europe and the U.K. are now pretty much the only major developed economies standing in the way. And with that in mind, Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen said the EU is open to discussing all options on the table.
The European Union is also ready to discuss any proposal that address the crisis in an effective and pragmatic manner. And that's why we are ready to discuss how the US proposal for waiver on intellectual property protection for COVID vaccines could help achieve that objective.
The solution Brussels would ultimately like to see is the so-called third way, which has been promoted by the new WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. Now, under this approach, vaccine manufacturing would be licensed to countries or companies based on multilateral rules, which supporters say would ensure adequate supplies while also protecting intellectual property. AstraZeneca already has this type of agreement in place with the Serum Institute of India. But pressure is certainly mounting. Of the 1.1 billion vaccine doses administered globally, just 0.3% have gone to low-income countries. The rest are being snatched up by rich nations, and that is not sitting well with a lot of people here in Europe. The French and Belgian governments have already signaled their support for these waivers, and this issue is going to be front and center at a leaders' summit in Portugal this weekend. Tony Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Well, for more on this, I'm now joined by Dr. Hu Yuan-Cheong, a senior legal and policy advisor for the Access campaign of MSF, or Doctors Without Borders. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us. Now, of course, while the US's support for a patent waiver has been welcomed by public health advocates around the world, the International Pharmaceutical Federation, among others, has voiced its disappointment. They've argued that the focus right now should rather be on eliminating trade barriers and addressing distribution bottlenecks. What is your view on this? Are poorer countries essentially ready to take advantage of a patent waiver?
Thank you very much. We are very happy to see US has changed the position because this marked a very dramatic breakthrough after 7 months of delay in this process of negotiation. And we acknowledge there's multiple challenges facing this pandemic and facing access to sufficient vaccines in developing countries, and many different measures and policy interventions are needed to address multiple challenges. But the intellectual property barrier that hinders the leverage of the global capacity to contribute to the production and the supply of vaccines and medicines and other medical tools has to be addressed immediately. So we disagree with what the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association's point in terms that other measures need to be used to address other matters, but the fact that their member company have been controlling the technology and not willing to openly share those technology with the developing countries to leverage the maximum level of capacity and contribution has to be addressed now by government, and then adopting the waiver going forward, hopefully, would empower government to have an additional legal tool to move around and change this situation.
Well, Doctor, we know, of course, that initially South Africa and India, having put forward this proposal, were also addressing concerns around medical devices and diagnostic technologies as far as intellectual property is concerned. What is your take on this? Does equal access to this type of medical intervention or equal access to medicines overall go beyond the vaccines themselves when it comes to fighting COVID-19?
Exactly. We totally agree with this and agree with the original scope that been proposed by South Africa, India, and joined actually by nearly the whole continent of Africa and many developing countries. Access to medicine, treatment, and diagnostic and devices, materials, raw materials, and technology needed to produce those products are absolutely essential and have to be free from monopoly. So we acknowledge and also call it a crucial attention and step for all countries to make sure all technology are included, including vaccines.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hu Yuan-Cheong, joining us there from Geneva. Now let's move on to France, where the Counter-Terrorism Office has begun an investigation into the disappearance of a French journalist in Mali. Olivier Dubois had been missing for a month, but in a video published on Wednesday, he's shown calling on his family and friends, as well as authorities, to secure his release. Ross Cullen has more from Paris.
Well, this is the front page on Thursday of the French national daily newspaper Libération, simply showing a picture of Olivier Dubois, saying journalist hostage, saying our correspondent was kidnapped by a jihadist group affiliated to Al-Qaeda. Now, that group is potentially believed to be the so-called Group for the Support of Islam and Muslims, or JNIM. Now, the 46-year-old father of two had been living in Bamako for several years, the Malian capital. That's where he had been reporting for Libération from. But on the 8th of April, he was kidnapped near the city of Gao in the east of the country. And there has been no news of him since then, until the release earlier this week of a video showing Olivier Dubois in a tent somewhere in a desert region. And in a short message in the video, which is likely to have been dictated to him by his captors, Olivier Dubois calls on his friends, family and the French authorities to do everything in their power to secure his release. Now, the NGO Reporters Without Borders, which defends and promotes the freedom of the press across the world, says it learned of the disappearance of Mr. Dubois 2 days after it happened, but it chose not to report it at the time so as not to hamper any potential positive outcome to the situation. Here in the French capital, the Foreign Ministry is aware of the situation, and the National Anti-Terrorism Prosecutor's Office has opened a preliminary investigation into what it's described as kidnapping by an organised group in connection with a terrorist enterprise. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Meanwhile, in Nigeria, 27 students from a college in Kaduna State have been freed by their captors. The students were released on Wednesday. They were part of the 37 students abducted in March from the Federal College of Forestry Mechanization. Now, 10 students were released earlier, but now all students have regained their freedom. CGTN's Deji Badmus brings us more on that story.
The very moment the students were brought to the police headquarters in Kaduna State shortly after their release, they all look visibly weak and can barely manage to walk. Their captors held them hostage in the forest for 55 days. Their appearance clearly tell how badly they were treated. The release of the students was facilitated by a popular Islamic cleric in the state. Their kidnappers had demanded a ransom of $1.2 million. The state government refused to pay, saying it does not negotiate or pay ransom to bandits. At the school, jubilant parents have begun gathering to receive their children.
I'm excited, overjoyed. I really went through a lot. Even though sometimes you see me in bed, the Lord was my strength, and it's still my strength. It was not easy, but with God, everything today has finally. He said that he will put smell on us, and now he have already put the smell on us.
Well, we have been having sleepless nights. Each time there is a change of weather, we imagine how they pass through such weather without a roof over their heads. So once we thought of that, we hardly sleep until maybe early morning hours before you can catch a sleep of 1 hour or 30 minutes before you go for work. So we thank God that they are alive. That's the most important thing. I know we can encourage our children to pick up the pieces of their life and continue with their studies.
The students are currently undergoing medical treatment in Kaduna City. Authorities say they will be formally reunited with their parents on Friday, while the medical treatment will continue thereafter. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, surviving climate change. Locals in Zanzibar replenish coral reefs to save the aquatic environment.
Its effects are surreal, but its existence is undeniable. Mother Nature is fighting back against a species that is destroying it.
We're here to raise our voices. We know that climate change is already started and it's killing us.
It hurts.
Amid the tears and the grief, however, there is hope for resolution.
We need to live in harmony with nature.
We focus on the deeds, the deals, and the people working to make a difference. This is Surviving Climate Change, only on CGTN.
Zimbabwe is proceeding with the sale of hunting rights for over 500 elephants. That's despite the jumbos being red-listed by the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Farai Makutoya reports.
Between May and October each year, hundreds of wild animals are fair game for trophy hunters. The most prized targets are lions and elephants. This year, Zimbabwe is selling hunting rights for over 500 of the latter because it says there are too many of them.
The numbers are there. And I think there's enough evidence to say our elephants in Southern Africa, they are overpopulated. In fact, the elephants are becoming a danger unto themselves in terms of destroying their own habitat. The evidence is there. If you visit Ongwen today, it's not what it was 20, 30 years ago.
A 2014 census showed Zimbabwe was home to over 83,000 elephants, a population that has been growing at an estimated 5% per year. Deprived of revenue it could generate by selling its ivory stockpile, the country sees hunting quotas as an important source of money for conservation. Proponents of trophy hunting say it brings in income, which helps communities that live adjacent to and bear the brunt of conflicts with the wild animals. However, opponents say the benefits are overstated.
Over the years, we have seen issues to do with corruption at community level. We have seen even communities are actually complaining that they are not getting any benefits from this process.
Controversial hunts value at national level has also been questioned.
There are some researches which you can check on. They are indicating that trophy hunting per se contributes around 0.3% to the national economy. It is tourism where people come in to view, not to hunt. That is bringing much needed fiscus into the national economy.
The raging debate poses important questions.
If you were to go to a community member who has lost their crops due to wildlife, to a community member who lost their loved one due to an attack, maybe by an elephant, you will understand that yes, we really need to look at trophy hunting. How do we make it more sustainable? How do we ensure that the benefits reach communities this time around?
The government is revamping a rural community resource management program to address the concerns. Farai Makutoya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Libya's Foreign Minister Najla al-Mangoush has called on Turkey to implement UN Security Council resolutions demanding the repatriation of foreign fighters and mercenaries. Her remarks came during a joint press conference with her Turkish counterpart. Turkey was militarily involved in Libya's civil war, backing the former UN-recognized Government of National Accord. Here's Adel al-Makhraoui with more.
The UN support mission in Libya estimates the presence of at least 20,000 foreign fighters in Libya. Many of them came through Turkey. For the newly appointed Unity Libyan government, these forces are an obstacle on its road to hold general elections in December.
Turkey's role is important in stopping the war. It's important and is stabilizing the ceasefire. We call on Turkey to take steps in implementing all decisions of the Berlin Conference and resolution of the Security Council, and to cooperate with us to put an end to the presence of all foreign forces and mercenaries in order to preserve the sovereignty of Libya.
Al-Mangoush directed these remarks to Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu. He was in Tripoli with a delegation that included Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar. In a meeting with Mohammed al-Haddad, the most prominent senior Libyan military figure in Tripoli, Akar insisted that Turkish military forces in Libya will continue their presence.
Turkey says its military presence is legitimate because of a defense agreement signed with the previous Libyan government.
Turkey is holding tight to this agreement. The unity government, however, desires the review of the agreements signed under the previous administration, specifically the military agreement.
In 2019, Turkey officially announced sending military troops to Libya to defend the government of national accord against an offensive from the eastern-based Libyan National Army. Besides the presence of foreign military troops, Libya is home to fighters from Chad, Syria and Sudan.
Najla El-Mangoush's call for Turkey to withdraw its troops from Libya doesn't indicate any tension between Libya's unity government and Ankara. On the contrary, Prime Minister Abdelhamid al-Dubeiba's first visit was to Turkey. There he signed several economic agreements, maybe hoping that this sign of goodwill could convince Turkey to withdraw its troops. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The east coast of Africa is rich in coral reefs and marine life, making Zanzibar Island in Tanzania an aquatic paradise. In recent years, however, corals have been threatened by climate change, with many beginning to bleach and die. The disappearance of coral reefs has implications for fishermen. And to protect the ocean, a group of locals have switched from fishing to coral farming, planting corals and giving back to nature.
Naitwa Abdi Mjaka Haji, nimezaliwa Makunduchi na naishi Jambiani. Nipo Jambiani takribani miaka 26 mpaka sasa hivi. Na naipenda bahari kwa sababu toka utotoni kwangu kama nilivyokuwa nachukuliwa na babangu kwenda baharini, kwenda kuona mambo mengi ndani ya bahari. Nikaamua kujishughulisha na harakati zangu za maisha kama vile kuvua kwanza, na nilikuwa nachukuliwa na babangu kwenda kuvua. Nilisikia tu kuwa kuna mzungu anaanzisha mradi fulani wa kuweka kama hifadhi za samaki baharini. Baadaye nikaamua tu kujiunga na mradi wa marine culture ili kujua baadhi ya mambo kwenye bahari.
Marine culture has been founded in 2008 as an NGO in Switzerland and as a branch here in Zanzibar, Tanzania. And since this, we have several projects in aquaculture development and conservation. We try to give an opportunity to people to learn the coral farming and the coral restoration.
Kabla ya kuja hapa nilikuwa sijui nini coral. Lakini nilipoanza tu kuenda baharini nikajua coral ni nini. Ilipokuwa mara yangu ya kwanza kudive, baada ya kuona zile coral kufa, nilijisikia vibaya sana.
We started to do coral gardening or growing corals to create jobs for the fishermen. The idea was to sell the products to the aquarium market. But then the climate catastrophe came. It was an El Niño year in 2016 that all our corals died.
Matumbawe hutengenezwa na wanyama wadogo wadogo ambao wanaitwa polyps. Ambao hawaonekani kwa macho mpaka kwa vifaa maalum vya kisayansi. Coral ni kiumbe hai kama vilivyo viumbe hai vingine, kwa maana coral inakula, inaishi na pia zinazaa. Au kipindi cha jua kali, maji yanapokuwa moto na coral pia inachuja rangi na baadaye kufa kabisa. Matumbawe hayo hutengenezwa kitu ambacho kinaitwa mwamba wa matumbawe, ambao mwamba huo huvutia wanyama wadogo wadogo na kufanya kama ni makazi yao. Na baadaye wavuvi huwa wanakuja kwenye mwamba huo na kujipatia riski zao za kuvua samaki kwenye mwamba huo wa matumbawe.
Kwa sasa tupo katika soko la samaki ambalo ni la Malindi, na tunajionea jinsi gani samaki wanapopatikana kwa wingi, lakini isitoshe tupo katika samaki wanaopatikana kwa wingi au wanaocheza katika maeneo ya coral ni changu peke yake ambayo ndio anayopatikana kwa wingi, na wanakuwa ni vivutio kwa samaki wakubwa kama tuna au red snapper na wengineo. Lakini vile vile kwa sasa hivi samaki hawapatikani kwa kiasi kikubwa kwa sababu hali ya matumbawe imetoweka au imepotea kabisa.
Na tuliamua kuotesha miche ya coral na kurejesha katika hali zao za kawaida. Tunakuwa tunaenda baharini kwa kulinda haya matumbawe. tunakuwa tunapanda coral. Tunaziweka kwenye diski. Na baadaye wiki moja au wiki mbili zinakuwa tayari zishakamata ile diski na zinakuwa tayari zishakuwa kidogo. Takriban mwezi mmoja au miezi miwili tayari zishakuwa za kwenda kutransplanti. Baadhi ya siku zinakuwa zipo chafu, kama zinaingia kama majani fulani hivi, tunachukua miswaki na tunasafisha kwa ajili ya kuwa nzuri zaidi.
This is an ongoing program. We plant nearly 10,000 new corals every year. And especially we are looking for a high amount of biodiversity, adapt from the nature.
Mpaka sasa hivi nipo hapa marine culture kwa ajili ya kuilinda bahari, na nahakikisha nitailinda bahari mpaka watoto wangu au wajukuu zangu au hata ndugu majirani nao pia wajionee kilichomo ndani ya bahari kama vile coral na samaki.
And let's now go to Ramanyang for your business news.
Thank you very much, Lindy. Here's what's coming up in business. Nigeria extends an incentive program designed to boost dollar remittances into Africa's largest oil producer. And we'll explore why Eskom isn't quite sold on a possible deal to buy electricity from a Turkish firm.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria's central bank will indefinitely continue an incentive program designed to boost dollar remittances. Now, this initiative rewards recipients with 5 naira for every dollar they receive through licensed international money transfer operators and commercial banks. The program was originally scheduled to end on Saturday. It was introduced to encourage dollar recipients to use formal banking channels and to help the central bank in its long struggle to stabilize the value of the naira. Nigeria's central bank does keep the currency on a very tight leash against the dollar, using a range of capital controls, among other tools. The naira has been devalued by the CBN 3 times since last year after a sharp drop in oil earnings, which account for roughly 90% of the country's foreign exchange inflows. Now, further south, Eskom does appear to be pretty skeptical about buying electricity from Turkey's power ships, citing its overstretched finances. Now, the Turkish firm's 20-year power purchase agreement would essentially add even more strain to Eskom's weak finances and heighten its exposure to fossil fuels at a time when over 90% of the country's electricity is already coming from coal-fired power plants. Power Ships is to provide, or rather to build rather, a 1.22 gigawatt gas-fired power plant based on offshore vessels. The South African company, however, has a crippling debt load of over $32 billion. It's been struggling to meet debt service payments, even with government bailouts coming through. The deal is set to close by the end of July upon approval from Eskom, environmentalists and port officials. Still in South Africa, the country's poultry sector remains on high alert after recording yet another case of avian flu in a broiler farm in Gauteng. Now, the latest outbreak has been traced to wild birds. Here's CGTN's Sumitra Naidu with the details.
SA Poultry believes the avian flu outbreak is contained to 3 affected farms in Gauteng and in the Northwest Province. Authorities are managing to contain the outbreak, drawing on their experience from a devastating outbreak in 2017.
What the Department of Agriculture have done in the past, and also during this outbreak, was to negotiate with the importing countries that import from South Africa for what we call compartmentalization. And that is really something similar to our provinces, where we try to keep certain provinces negative of the disease and others that might be positive will obviously be banned. So we do have a successful system of compartmentalization, and only 2 compartments are currently registered as positive for the disease.
Lesotho and Swaziland have continued with restrictions on Gauteng imports, while Botswana has lifted some of its restrictions and has agreed to take supplies from unaffected farms. Mozambique continues to import unrestricted.
Various programs or systems were put in place since 2017 to assist us in not getting the disease, firstly, and then secondly, once you get the disease, how we can control the spread of the disease. I think 3 important points here would be that we've got the ability to very quickly react, isolate a farm, and cull the chickens. Those chickens never end up in the market. So that is one very important one. Secondly, we've got a system, a computerized web-based system, where our producers that regularly test for influenza.
This current strain of the disease is highly contagious. Poultry producers remain on high alert, but the agricultural sector, together with animal health, have been quick and efficient in containing a potential wider spread. The initial layer farm, where the strain was first discovered, was forced to cull around 240,000 birds, while the Northwest broiler farm culled 7,000 birds last week to contain the outbreak. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
On to Zimbabwe now. Its economic output now stands at around $24 billion. And the country's finance ministry is optimistically forecasting GDP growth of over 7% this year. Most citizens, however, say they're yet to feel the benefits of this recent growth. Here's CGTN's Farai Makutuya exploring why.
A bumper harvest, increased industrial capacity utilization owing to stronger demand for local products under COVID-19 restrictions, falling inflation and a stable currency have been the bedfellows of Zimbabwe's recent economic resurgence.
If you look at some of the crucial indicators in the economy, they seem to be coming right. These indicators have to be watched. There's no doubt about it that there is pressure in the economy, particularly from wage pressures coming through from the civil servants and from ordinary citizens.
Finance Minister Professor Mthuli Ncube says the country is now a $24 billion economy and expects 7.4% growth this year. The numbers, which make good reading on paper, may not translate to the lived reality.
The gap between the rich and poor is actually wider. A lot of people are earning below the poverty datum line, or they're earning amounts which are less, like possibly much less, 80% less than the USD comparatives when we did have the multi-currency. So if it's not flowing to the people, then it's just government that's playing up statistics at the moment.
Some observers say the full impact of the gains will be felt later. To sustain the positive trajectory, authorities have been urged to expedite policies that will increase production in two key sectors of the economy. These are agriculture and mining. One will substitute food imports and the other will generate foreign currency. Government also needs to maintain its fiscal discipline.
Government needs to not borrow, particularly from the unsupervised central bank overdraft. Government needs to also get its debts under control and make sure, to coin a well-used frame, live within its means.
The Southern African nation is anticipating a rebound from the COVID-19 crisis as it rolls out an accelerated mass vaccination program. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
And away from the continent, Australia's government is facing a rising tide of criticism over a threat to jail Australian citizens for trying to return home from India. India now accounts for over 7% of total deaths and 13% of active COVID cases worldwide. Human rights groups say this harsh measure is racist and violates international law. Greg Navarro takes up the story from Sydney.
In the western Sydney suburb of Harris Park, where nearly half of the people here are of Indian descent, thoughts of the COVID crisis taking place roughly 10,000 kilometers away are never far from the minds of many, including Mahesh Raj.
I am worried about my family because my mom, dads, brothers all are there.
Raj and a lot of people here said the Australian government is adding to that worry and stress. The government has threatened criminal charges against any of the more than 9,000 Australian citizens currently in India who return home.
At the moment in India, if anybody falls sick, I'm not sure what their chances are for securing a bed in ICU or oxygen. And if happens to be Australian citizen, who's going to be answerable to that?
Like many countries, Australia's government has banned travel from India as COVID cases there continue to soar. But after at least 2 people found a loophole and arrived from a third country, the government issued tougher measures. Australian citizens found violating that ban now face up to 5 years in jail and tens of thousands of dollars in fines.
The challenge we're facing here is not just the rampant spread of the pandemic in India, but it has been the accelerated rate of where we've seen infection of people coming from India.
Critics say Australia's harsh ban isn't proportional to its response to serious outbreaks seen in other countries.
Why India? Why brown-skinned Aussies, not white-skinned Aussies? This is, if we were to think that there isn't an element of discrimination or racism to this, we're being naive and dangerous to not hold the government into account.
Questions are also being raised about whether criminally charging Australians for trying to return home is legal, whether that ban can actually be challenged in the nation's High Court. The first legal challenge has already been lodged in federal court, despite the government's contention that the ban is covered by the country's Biosecurity Act.
The government may be within its right of the Biosecurity Act to put this reform in place, but they are not in their rights within human rights and international law to do so.
Australia's government has softened its approach since announcing the strict ban. Prime Minister Scott Morrison now says it's highly unlikely criminal charges would actually be filed. For people here worried about loved ones stuck overseas, that's not good enough.
Australia should be extracting those people, showing the rest of the world that these are Australian Indians who got stuck there for whatever reason, and we're going to pull our people out. Simple as that.
Australia's government says it will decide whether to extend the ban next week. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
All right, then I'll leave it there for the time being, but I'll be back at the top of the hour. In Global Business, we'll be diving a little deeper into that US decision to support moves to have a temporary patent waiver as far as the IP for COVID-19 vaccines is concerned. But is that the silver bullet that we're looking for at the moment? We'll have some answers for you at the top of the hour. See you then. For now, back to Lindy.
Thanks, Rama. Well, let's take a short break. Your sports news up next. Coming up, South Africa named Belgian Hugo Broos as the new Bafana Bafana head coach.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Tokyo Olympic torch began its 2-day journey across Japan.